There's something strange about the way people listen now. Everyone says they're busy. No one has time. But somehow, millions of people will sit for 2 or 3 hours listening to a conversation that doesn't rush anywhere. No jump cuts. No background music screaming for attention. Just voices, thoughts, pauses. And that tells you something important about human nature. Because underneath all the noise, all the scrolling, all the notifications, people are starving for something real. Not motivation quotes. Not fake confidence. Not perfectly edited lives. They want honesty. They want to hear someone think out loud. And that's what this is. This isn't a lecture. It's not advice. It's not a performance. It's a long, honest conversation about pain, comedy, masculinity, failure, and why modern life feels confusing even when everything looks successful on paper. Take a breath. Settle in. This isn't meant to be rushed. One of the weirdest truths about life is that the people who make us laugh the hardest usually understand pain better than anyone else. Comedy doesn't come from comfort. It never has. Real comedy comes from embarrassment, from rejection, from saying the wrong thing at the wrong time and realizing, oh, that's who I really am. Most people spend their lives running from that moment. Comedians chase it. Think about that. Most people want to appear strong. Comedians are willing to look weak in public. They step on stage and say, here's the thing I'm most ashamed of. Let's talk about it. That's not confidence. That's survival. Because when you grow up feeling misunderstood, or invisible, or slightly off-center from the world around you, humor becomes a weapon. Not against others, but against despair. If you can laugh at something, it stops owning you. That's why dark humor exists. Not because people are cruel, but because they're trying to stay sane.
In America especially, there's this strange pressure to always be okay. You're supposed to be confident, successful, optimistic, driven. And if you're struggling, you're supposed to struggle quietly. But that's not how human beings actually work, that we break, that we doubt, that we get addicted. Not just to substances, but to approval, to attention, to work, to distraction. And nobody really talks about that, honestly. That's why long conversations matter. Because you can't fake yourself for 2 hours. Eventually, the mask slips. The voice slows down, the jokes turn into stories, and the truth shows up. Failure is one of the most misunderstood things in modern culture. People talk about failure like a temporary obstacle on the way to success, like a motivational poster. But real failure doesn't feel inspiring. It feels humiliating. It feels like sitting alone in your car after bombing in front of a crowd and thinking, why did I ever think I could do this? It feels like calling your parents and pretending everything is fine. It feels like watching people your age move forward while you feel stuck. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. Failure doesn't make you stronger automatically. Most of the time, it just makes you tired. What makes you stronger is surviving failure without lying to yourself about it. That's the difference. Some people fail and rewrite the story to protect their ego. Others fail and let change them. Only one of those leads anywhere real. There's a quiet crisis happening with masculinity right now. And it's not what social media makes it look like, that it's not about men being weak, that it's not about men being toxic, that it's about men being confused. For generations, masculinity was simple. Provide, protect, endure. You didn't talk about how you felt. You handled it. And now suddenly, Men are being told to open up, but only in very specific, socially approved ways. Be vulnerable, but not awkward. Be emotional, but not intense. Be honest, but not uncomfortable. That's not vulnerability. That's performance. Real vulnerability is messy. It doesn't fit in a clip. It takes time to explain. And most men don't know where to put those feelings, so they bury them under work or humor or silence. That silence builds pressure, and pressure always finds a way out. Comedy has always been one of the safest release valves. On stage, you're allowed to say the things you're not supposed to say anywhere else. You're allowed to admit fear, anger, confusion, as long as you make it funny. And that's a strange deal when you think about it. Society says you can tell the truth, but only if you disguise it. That's why comedians sometimes sound more honest than politicians, therapists, or influencers. They're not trying to fix you. They're just saying, yeah, this is weird, right? And when the audience laughs, there's relief. Not because it's funny, but because it's shared. There's something powerful about bombing on stage. Not the kind of bombing you joke about later, the real kind. The kind where nothing works. Where the room goes cold. Where you hear your own heartbeat louder than the laughs. That moment strips you down. It forces you to confront a brutal question. Who am I when this doesn't work? Not when people clap. Not when you're validated. But when the thing you built your identity around fails in public. A lot of people quit at that moment. And honestly, that makes sense. Because continuing requires a specific kind of stubborn honesty. You have to admit you're not as good as you thought, without deciding you're worthless. That balance is rare. Modern culture loves shortcuts. 10 steps to success. 5 habits of confident people. 30-second clips that promise clarity. But real growth is slow and boring and uncomfortable. It's showing up again after a bad night. It's rewriting jokes no one will ever hear. It's questioning your own stories. That doesn't sell well, but it works. That there's also a dark side to being funny that people don't talk about enough. When your value comes from making people laugh, silence feels dangerous. If you're not funny, who are you? That's where addiction sneaks in. Not always drugs or alcohol. Sometimes it's applause. Sometimes it's attention. Sometimes it's being needed. Anything to avoid sitting alone with your thoughts. The scariest moments are the quieto nest and audience and distraction. Just you and the question you've been avoiding. Long conversations create space for those questions. That's why they matter. You can't hide behind a persona forever. Eventually, you talk about the thing underneath the jokes, the fear of being irrelevant, the fear of not being enough, the fear that the success you chased won't fix the emptiness you feel. And when someone else admits that out loud, it gives permission to everyone listening, not to give up, but to be honest. Honesty doesn't mean pessimism. It means clarity. It means saying, this is hard, without pretending it's a lesson already learned. It means understanding that growth often feels like loss before it feels like progress. And maybe that's the real reason people listen to long conversations. Not for answers, but for company. To hear another human being think in real time. This is just the beginning. We haven't even scratched the surface yet. Of addiction, of cancel culture, of why society punishes honesty, or why people who make us laugh often carry the heaviest thoughts. But if you're still here, that already says something. That it means you're not looking for noise, that you're looking for something real. Take a breath, that we're going deeper from here. There's a moment in every person's life where success stops feeling like the answer. Not because success is bad, but because it was never designed to carry the weight we put on it. People don't chase success for money. They chase it for relief. Relief from doubt. Relief from insecurity. Relief from the feeling that maybe they're not enough. And that's where things get dangerous. Because when success finally shows up, when the money comes in, when the audience grows, when people recognize your name, you expect silence inside. But most of the time it gets louder. The fear doesn't leave. It just changes its voice. Now it says, don't lose this. Don't fall off. Don't let them see the cracks. And suddenly, you're not enjoying success. You're guarding it. That's why addiction often follows achievement. Not because people are weak, but because pressure without honesty needs an escape. Some people drink. Some people use substances. Some people drown themselves in work. Some people obsess over their phone, refreshing comments like it's oxygen. Different methods. Same pain. Addiction isn't about pleasure. It's about control. It's about finding one thing that reliably changes how you feel, even if it destroys everything else. And in a culture that rewards output but ignores internal health, addiction doesn't look like a problem at first. It looks like productivity. It looks like confidence. It looks like success. Until it doesn't. Comedy sits in a strange place here. Because comedy rewards honesty, but punishes sincerity. You can say the darkest truth on stage, as long as it's funny. But the moment you slow down and speak plainly, people get uncomfortable. They don't know whether to clap or worry. So comedians learn a skill early. Wrap pain in humor. Deliver truth with a punchline. Never let the room get too quiet. But silence is where the real stuff lies. And that's why long conversations matter more than jokes. Because eventually, the laughs fade, and what's left is the person. There's a reason cancel culture hits comedians harder than almost anyone else. Comedy lives on the edge of social agreement. A joke only works if everyone understands what's being broken. And right now, society doesn't agree on much. Everyone's listening, but through different lenses, different fears, different moral hierarchies. So intent gets ignored, context disappears, and curiosity gets replaced by judgment. That creates a chilling effect. People don't stop thinking dangerous thoughts. They just stop saying them. And unspoken thoughts don't disappear. They rot. The healthiest conversations are the ones where no one is trying to win, where nobody is performing for a clip, where you're allowed to say, I don't know, without being attacked. That's rare now. Most discussions feel like courtrooms. Evidence, accusations, verdicts. No room for evolution. No room for contradiction. But human beings are contradictory by nature. We hold opposing ideas all the time. We feel compassion and resentment, confidence and fear, hope and cynicism. Pretending otherwise doesn't make us better. It makes us fake. One of the most damaging myths in modern culture is that being offended equals being harmed. Discomfort isn't danger. Confusion isn't violence. Hearing a perspective you don't like isn't oppression. Growth requires friction. Comedy has always been a form of social friction. It pokes at assumptions. It exposes hypocrisy. It says, are we sure about this? When you remove that, you don't create safety. You create fragility. And fragile systems break under pressure. Masculinity gets pulled into this mess in a unique. Men are told to be emotionally open, but also told that their instincts are suspicious. So what do you do with anger? With competitiveness? With ambition? Suppress it, and it leaks out sideways. Ignore it, and it becomes resentment. Overindulge it, and it becomes destruction. Balance requires honesty, and honesty requires space to talk without being labeled. That's why so many men retreat into silence or humor. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know where their truth is allowed. There's something humbling about talking for hours without a script. No filters, no edits, just time. Time exposes shallow ideas. It reveals contradictions. It forces nuance. That's why short clips lie so easily. You can make anyone look stupid in 10 seconds. You can make any idea sound extreme without context. But over 2 hours, you reveal yourself. And that's terrifying and freeing. A lot of people mistake confidence for certainty. But the most confident people are often the ones most comfortable saying, I might be wrong. Certainty is rigid. Confidence is flexible. Certainty needs protection. Confidence can absorb criticism. Comedy teaches that lesson quickly because the audience will let you know immediately when something doesn't land. No corporate feedback loops. No politicians. Just truth. And if you survive that, you learn something valuable. Your ideas aren't you. Your failure isn't your identity. Your worth isn't tied to applause. That realization is freedom. The danger comes when you forget it. When applause becomes validation instead of feedback. When criticism feels like annihilation. That's when people stop evolving. They play it safe. They repeat what worked. They become a version of themselves frozen in time. And nothing ages faster than someone afraid to change. Modern life offers endless distraction. Podcasts playing at double speed. Videos auto playing into the next one. Notifications pulling attention apart. Silence feels foreign now. But silence is where reflection happens. That's why people resist it. Because reflection forces responsibility. You start asking questions like, why am I really doing this? What am I avoiding? Who am I without the persona? Those questions don't have quick answers. They require patience and honesty and sometimes pain. Long conversations don't solve those questions, but they normalize asking them. They remind you that confusion isn't failure. It's part of being alive. That doubt doesn't mean weakness. It means awareness. And that laughter doesn't cancel pain. It coexists with it. If there's one thing comedy teaches better than almost anything else, it's humility. No matter how good you get, the crowd owes you nothing. Every night, you start at zero. That's a powerful lesson in a world obsessed with status. It keeps you grounded, if you let it. We're living in a time where everyone is encouraged to build a brand, but few are encouraged to build a self. Brands don't age well. People do. Brands chase relevance. People chase meaning. And meaning takes time. It takes conversations that don't rush to conclusions. Thoughts that aren't optimized for clicks. Moments where you admit uncertainty. That's what this space is for. And we're still not done. Because next comes the hardest part. Identity, ego, and what happens when the thing you love starts to own you. That's where things get uncomfortable. And that's where things get real. There's a quiet moment that comes right before things start to fall apart. It's not dramatic. There's no warning siren. It usually sounds like confidence. You've done the work. You've survived the bad nights. People recognize you now. Your voice matters. And somewhere in that comfort ego sneaks in. Not the loud, cartoon version of ego, the subtle one, the kind that whispers, "Don't change this. Don't risk looking stupid again. You've earned this position." That's when growth slows down. Ego isn't arrogance. Ego is identity attachment. It's when who you are becomes tangled up with what you do. At first, that feels motivating. Your work gives you purpose. Your success gives you confidence. But over time, it becomes fragile. Because if your identity depends on performance, failure stops being feedback. It becomes a threat. And threats trigger defense. That's when people stop experimenting. They stop telling the truth. They stop taking creative risks. Not because they've run out of ideas, but because they're afraid of losing the version of themselves they've built. This happens a lot in comedy. Early on, you're free. You're nobody. You can bomb. You can be weird. You can chase instincts without consequence. But once people expect something from you, freedom shrinks. Now, there's a version of you that the audience wants. And every time you step on stage, there's a question hanging in the air. Will I give them what they came for, or what I actually feel? That tension never fully goes away. Passion turning into a trap is one of the cruelest tricks of success. The thing that saved you becomes the thing you fear losing. So you protect it, you curate it, you sanitize it, and slowly the work loses its edge. Not because you've become lazy, but because honesty feels too expensive. There's also the fear no one talks about openly. Irrelevance, not failure, not poverty, being forgotten. In a culture obsessed with visibility, disappearing feels like death. That fear drives people to say things they don't believe, to chase trends they don't respect, to stay loud when they should be quiet. It's exhausting, and it creates a strange irony. The more you try to stay relevant, the less authentic you become. And authenticity is the only thing that lasts. Self-sabotage often shows up right before breakthrough. Not because people don't want success, but because success forces a deeper commitment. If things really work, there's no more excuse. No more hiding behind potential. No more blaming circumstances. You have to show up fully. And that's terrifying. So people procrastinate. They pick fights. They numb themselves. They make impulsive decisions. Anything to delay the moment where they have to step into who they could be. There's a strange comfort in struggle. Struggle explains everything. Why you're stressed. Why you're angry. Why things aren't perfect yet. When struggle ends, responsibility begins. And responsibility doesn't feel heroic. It feels heavy. Long conversations reveal this pattern over and over again. People talk about their wins casually, but slow down when they talk about the moments where they almost quit, because those moments are honest. They expose doubt, fear, contradiction, and that's what listeners connect to, not perfection. One of the healthiest realizations a person can have is this: you're not your peak. You're not your worst moment either. You're the process in between. When you stop clinging to a fixed identity, you regain flexibility. You can evolve without feeling like you're betraying yourself. You can change your mind without feeling weak. That's real confidence. There's something deeply human about admitting, I don't know who I'm becoming yet. It takes pressure off pretending. It opens space for curiosity. And curiosity is where creativity lives. The problem with modern culture is that it rewards certainty and punishes exploration. People want answers, hot takes, clear positions. But most meaningful ideas start as questions. Comedy understands that. A joke isn't a statement, it's a test. You throw an idea into the room and see what happens. Sometimes it lands. Sometimes it dies. Both outcomes teach you something. When ego is in charge, failure feels personal. When curiosity is in charge, failure feels informative. That difference changes everything. There's also grief and growth. You outgrow versions of yourself that once kept you alive. You lose old habits, old friendships, old coping mechanisms. That loss hurts, even when growth is healthy. And people don't talk about that enough. A lot of humor comes from mourning old selves. The insecure kid, the angry version, the one who needed approval to survive. Laughing at those versions doesn't mean disrespect. It means distance. It means you survived. But distance doesn't mean denial. The parts of you that struggled still exist. They just don't run the show anymore. Unless you ignore them. That's when they come back louder. The most interesting people aren't the ones who figured everything out. They're the ones still paying attention, still listening, still questioning, still willing to look stupid in pursuit of truth. That's rare, and it's magnetic. This is where things start to shift. Because once ego loosens its grip, something else shows up. Responsibility without fear. Ambition without desperation. Humor without armor. That's where the conversation goes next. There's a strange myth that freedom feels light. People imagine freedom as ease. No rules. No pressure. No responsibility. But real freedom feels heavy at first. Because the moment you stop blaming systems, people, or circumstances, you inherit your own life. And that weight is uncomfortable. Responsibility isn't about control. It's about ownership. It's the quiet decision to stop outsourcing your sense of meaning. No one tells you how unsettling that can be. Because once you accept responsibility, excuses stop working. You can still fail. You can still struggle. But you can't pretend it's someone else's fault anymore. And that honesty changes you. Truth feels dangerous now. Not because truth is violent, but because it disrupts stories people rely on to feel stable. We live in a time where perception often matters more than reality. How things look, how things sound, how fast they can be judged. Truth doesn't move at that speed. Truth needs context. It needs patience. It needs room for contradiction. That makes it inconvenient. So people perform instead. They learn what to say, what not to say, when to nod, when to stay quiet. And slowly, pretending becomes a lifestyle. At first, it feels like survival. Later, it feels like suffocation. The cost of pretending is subtle. You don't feel it immediately. It shows up as fatigue, as irritability, as a vague sense that something is off. You start losing enthusiasm for things you used to love. Not because they stopped mattering, but because you're not showing up as yourself anymore. Comedy exposes this faster than most professions. Because pretending isn't funny. Audiences can feel when someone's hiding. The laughs thin out. The energy drops. And suddenly, you're doing the same jokes. But they don't hit the same. That's not a skill issue. That's an honesty issue. There's pressure now to be aligned at all times. Aligned with a tribe, a viewpoint, an ideology. But alignment without reflection is just obedience with better branding. Real alignment comes from an inner compass, not from applause. And inner compasses don't always point where crowds want to go. One of the hardest skills to develop is standing still when everyone else is rushing to react. Not responding immediately. Not explaining yourself right away. Letting things breathe. Silence gets misinterpreted as guilt now. But silence can also be thoughtfulness. It can be restraint. It can be strength. The internet rewards outrage. It's fast. It's loud. It's addictive. But outrage burns quickly. It leaves nothing behind except exhaustion. Long conversations are the opposite. They build slowly. They wander. They contradict themselves. And that's why they last. There's a difference between speaking truth and weaponizing it. Truth isn't a hammer. It's a mirror. It shows you things, but it doesn't tell you what to do with them. People misuse truth when they want control instead of understanding. Comedy, at its best, resists that. It reveals without instructing. The more you pay attention, the more you realize how many people are living from borrowed opinions, repeating phrases they've heard, adopting outrage they didn't originate. Not because they're stupid, but because it's safer than thinking alone. Thinking alone is risky. You might end up somewhere unpopular. But popularity isn't a reliable signal of truth. Never has been. Most meaningful ideas started as uncomfortable ones. They challenged norms. They annoyed people. They made rooms tense. And then, over time, they reshape culture, pretending delays that process. It trades short-term safety for long-term emptiness. And emptiness doesn't go away on its own. It demands attention. That's when people start feeling lost. Not because they don't know what to do, but because they've lost contact with why they're doing it. There's a quiet courage in saying, "This doesn't feel right to me," even when you can't fully explain why yet. That courage doesn't trend, but it compounds. Responsibility, truth, and freedom are tied together. You can't have one without the others. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. Truth without responsibility becomes cruelty. Responsibility without truth becomes control. Balance matters. Comedy has always walked that line. Too safe, and it dies. Too reckless, and it loses trust. The sweet spot is sincerity with restraint. Honesty with awareness. That's also where real conversation lives. Not in shouting, not in silence, but in listening long enough to change your mind. Most people aren't afraid of truth. They're afraid of what truth might cost them. Approval, status, belonging. But belonging that requires pretending isn't belonging. It's a transaction, and transactions don't nourish the soul. There's relief in dropping the act, even if it costs you something, even if it confuses people, because clarity feels better than approval, and peace feels better than performance. This is where the conversation starts to slow down, not because it's ending, but because depth requires patience. Next comes something even more personal, meaning, mortality, and why laughter becomes more important as time gets shorter. There comes a point where success stops being the question, not because you've achieved everything, but because you realize achievement doesn't answer what you thought it would. The question shifts from "how do I win?" to "why does any of this matter?" That's not a crisis. That's maturity. Meaning doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come with applause or metrics. Meaning usually shows up quietly, in moments you almost miss. A conversation that lingers. A laugh that comes from relief instead of performance. A choice you make when no one's watching. Success wants witnesses. Meaning doesn't care. Mortality has a way of sharpening perspective. You don't need tragedy to understand it. Just time. You start noticing how fast years compress, how phases blur together, how people drift in and out of your life without ceremony. And suddenly, urgency feels different, not frantic, focused. You stop asking, how much can I get? And start asking, what's worth carrying forward? Comedy changes when you realize time isn't infinite. Early on, jokes are about proving something. Proving you're smart. Proving you're fearless. Proving you belong. Later, jokes become about understanding. About forgiveness. About regret. About absurdity. The laughs get deeper. They're not louder. They're truer. There's a reason older comedians often sound calmer. Not softer, calmer. They've seen cycles repeat. Trends rise and fall. Certainties collapse. They don't need to rush the point anymore. They know if something's real, it lands. Time also strips away unnecessary fear. You stop worrying about impressing everyone. You realize most people are too busy with their own lives to judge yours as harshly as you imagine. That realization is liberating. It gives you permission to simplify. Meaning isn't found in extremes. It's not endless ambition. It's not total detachment. It's balance. Caring deeply without clinging. Working hard without losing yourself. Laughing without hiding. That balance takes practice and failure. Mortality doesn't make life smaller. It makes it precise. You become selective with energy, with attention, with relationships. You start asking better questions. Who listens when I speak honestly? Who challenges me without trying to control me? Who do I feel more like myself around? Those answers matter more than status. There's something grounding about realizing you're replaceable. Not in a cynical way, in a freeing way. The world doesn't rest on your shoulders. You can contribute without believing you're the center of the story. That humility takes pressure off. It allows gratitude to grow. Gratitude isn't forced positivity. It's recognition. Recognition that moments are temporary. That connection is rare. That laughter is a gift. Comedy, at its best, is gratitude in disguise. It says, this is ridiculous, and we're lucky to be here anyway. As people age, humor often gets darker, but also kinder. There's less interest in tearing things down for sport. More interest in revealing shared confusion. That's not selling out. That's seeing clearly. What actually lasts isn't fame. It's influence in small circles. A joke that helped someone through a bad night. A conversation that made someone feel less alone. An idea that stuck quietly and changed a decision. Those things don't trend, but they endure. Long conversations create space for that kind of impact. You stop worrying about impressing everyone. You realize most people are too busy with their own lives to judge yours as harshly as you imagine. That realization is liberating. It gives you permission to simplify. Meaning isn't found in extremes. It's not endless ambition. It's not total detachment. It's balance. Caring deeply without clinging. Working hard without losing yourself. Laughing without hiding. That balance takes practice and failure. Mortality doesn't make life smaller. It makes it precise. You become selective with energy, with attention, with relationships. You start asking better questions. Who listens when I speak honestly? Who challenges me without trying to control me? Who do I feel more like myself around? Those answers matter more than status. There's something grounding about realizing you're replaceable. Not in a cynical way, in a freeing way. The world doesn't rest on your shoulders. You can contribute without believing you're the center of the story. That humility takes pressure off. It allows gratitude to grow. Gratitude isn't forced positivity. It's recognition. Recognition that moments are temporary. That connection is rare. That laughter is a gift. Comedy, at its best, is gratitude in disguise. It says, "This is ridiculous, and we're lucky to be here anyway." As people age, humor often gets darker, but also kinder. There's less interest in tearing things down for sport, more interest in revealing shared confusion. That's not selling out. That's seeing clearly. What actually lasts isn't fame. It's influence in small circles. A joke that helps someone through a bad night. A conversation that made someone feel less alone. An idea that stuck quietly and changed a decision. Those things don't trend, but they endure. Long conversations create space for that kind of impact. Final stretch/closing. Uncertainty used to feel like a problem, something to solve, something to escape. But over time, you start to realize that uncertainty isn't a flaw in life. It is life. The moment you think you've figured everything out, you stop paying attention. And when you stop paying attention, you stop growing. Most anxiety comes from pretending certainty is possible, from telling yourself, "Once this happens, I'll relax. Once I reach that point, I'll be at peace." But there's always another point, another goal, another fear, another version of enough. Peace doesn't come from finishing the race. It comes from understanding you're allowed to walk sometimes. Humor changes when it stops being armor. Early on, jokes protect you. They deflect pain. They keep people at a distance. They give you control of the room. That's not wrong. It's necessary. But eventually, armor gets heavy, and humor can become something else. Not a shield, a bridge. The most powerful laughter isn't defensive. It's shared. It comes from recognition. That moment when someone laughs and thinks, "Yeah, that's exactly how it feels." No performance. No superiority. Just connection. Cynicism pretends to be intelligence. It sounds sharp. It feels safe. If you don't believe in anything too deeply, nothing can disappoint you. But cynicism is a dead end. It doesn't protect wisdom. It prevents it. Curiosity is braver. Curiosity risks being wrong. It risks being naive. It risks changing. But curiosity keeps you alive. It keeps you listening. It keeps you human. There's a temptation, especially as you get older, to harden, to lock in your beliefs, to simplify people into categories, to stop being surprised. That temptation is understandable, but it costs you wonder. And wonder is where joy hides. Staying curious doesn't mean staying ungrounded. It means staying open. It means admitting that you're still learning about yourself, about others, about this strange experience of being alive. One of the quiet tragedies of adulthood is how often people confuse being serious with being wise. Wisdom doesn't require bitterness. It doesn't require detachment. It requires honesty. And humor, strangely enough, is one of the most honest tools we have. Laughter reminds you that you're not alone in your confusion, that other people struggle with the same contradictions, that life doesn't make sense, and somehow still works. Long conversations don't offer conclusions. They offer companionship. They say, "You don't have to rush this. You're allowed to think." You're allowed to change. That's rare and valuable. If there's anything to take from all of this, it's not a rule or a lesson. It's permission. Permission to slow down. Permission to be uncertain. Permission to laugh without hiding. Permission to speak honestly, even when your voice shakes. You don't have to optimize your entire life. You don't have to monetize every passion. You don't have to turn every thought into a statement. Some things are allowed to just exist. The older you get, the more you realize that clarity isn't loud. It's calm. It doesn't announce itself. It settles. And maybe that's the real value of conversations like this. Not answers, but atmosphere. A space where complexity is allowed, where silence isn't awkward, where laughter and seriousness can sit in the same room without fighting. Life is short, not in a dramatic way, in a practical one, which means attention matters. Where you place it, who you give it to, what you let shape you. So pay attention to what makes you feel more like yourself. Not more impressive, not more validated, more you. Those signals are quiet, but they're reliable. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stay honest enough to keep adjusting. That's not weakness. That's maturity. And if you can keep your sense of humor while doing that, not as a weapon, not as a mask, but as a reminder, then you're doing better than you think. Take a breath. There's nowhere to rush to. This moment is already here.